and answer session. To ask a question, please press star 1 and state your name clearly when prompted. Now I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Patrick Shepard. Thank you. You may begin, sir.
Thank you, Arlene. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Advanced Practitioner Series. My name is Patrick Shepard. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Ana Galindo-Marrone, who's the Chief of the Hatch Act Unit at the Office of Special Counsel, and Erica Hamrick, who is the Deputy Chief of the Hatch Act Unit at the Office of Special Counsel. So we have a huge percentage of the Hatch Act expertise in the studio today, and we're very, very grateful that you could join us. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Excellent. And we want to jump right into the presentation, but I do have a couple of administrative announcements before we get started. We will be holding the Fundamentals series as scheduled next month, and we will be discussing the rules surrounding gifts between federal employees. We'll also be holding the Advanced Practitioner event on the third Thursday at noon, so do look for the registrations for those. Also, after today's presentation, you will receive a course evaluation. We do appreciate your comments and use them to inform our future broadcasts, so please take the time to complete those. And as always, if you're looking for materials to help your ethics program, you can always find some in the Institute for Ethics in Government store on the max.gov site. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. If you're on the Google Hangout, you can use the Hangout question app in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And those on the phone, you can ask a question by pressing *0. So shall we get into the slides?
Yes, please.
All right, and it's all yours.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Ana Galindo-Marrone. I'm the Chief of the Hatch Act Unit, and with me is Erica Hamrick, the Deputy of the Unit. And we are delighted to be here this afternoon having this outreach opportunity with the ethics community. I want to thank in particular OGE for allowing us this opportunity as we move closer into the 2016 presidential election. It seems like there's a lot of interest out there. We know, I believe there's at least over 400 folks signed up for this afternoon's conversation about the Hatch Act. And one of the things that Eric and I talked about in terms of our focus for this 1-hour session was, whether it should be sort of a broad approach to Hatch Act information or more narrow. And given that we saw that, although this is the Advanced Practitioner Series, there are a number of folks out there that identified as having been within the ethics community for 6 months to a year, we've decided to take the approach of broader applicability. And so we are going to be covering all 5 restrictions, mostly focusing on lesser restricted employees, bringing, of course, any of the experiences that we've picked up from the 2014 congressional race, and even some of the things that we're starting to see at present with the outreach that we've been doing, the questions that we're receiving from folks like you. In addition, we are thinking about having another event like this in a couple of months, where maybe we do focus more on some of the issues the advanced practitioners encounter concerning political appointees, the PAS, and high-level officials and their involvement with the campaigns and even the conventions. So stay tuned for that session in the future.
I think that's great. So we'll lay the foundation today,
Yes.
and then in a few months we can sort of build upon that to the more niche issues that we face as we get nearer a campaign.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick.
Excellent.
And so, again, as I mentioned, we're going to be the presentation is organized to cover all 5 of restrictions, and again, the focus will be on less restricted employees, and there will be a lot of discussion within the 5 restrictions about how social media is really impacting the number of cases that we see and sort of the federal employee engagement with social media and political activity. So the first thing that I'd like to do is to just very quickly cover who's covered by the Hatch Act. Many of you know that there are 2 categories of employees. The entire executive branch is covered by the Hatch Act with the exception of the president and the vice president. And then within that universe of employees, it breaks down into less restricted and further restricted. The less restricted may actively participate in political management, political campaigns, subject to the prohibitions that we're going to be discussing. So for example, as a less restricted employee, you can volunteer on your own time in your personal capacity to assist a campaign. The further restricted employees, in addition to being subject to the 5 core restrictions that we're going to discuss today, are also prohibited from actively participating in political management or political campaigning. Therefore, the further restricted employees, and Erica is going to be discussing this toward the back end of the presentation, but the further restricted employees cannot act in concert with a political campaign or a partisan group or political party. Any of their activity has to be done independent of these partisan entities, and there'll be more as we move through the presentation. Let me just very quickly identify who those further restricted employees are. As you can see, the majority of them are in intelligence or enforcement type agencies. For example, CIA, NSA, the FBI, my agency, the Office of Special Counsel, the Merit Systems Protection Board, the Federal Election Commission, to name some of those. But you can see the full list up on the screen. In addition, there are certain employees that, regardless of their employing agency, if they are holding one of the positions that you can view on the screen at present, these individuals are also further restricted. So for example, all career SES in the federal government are further restricted, as well as administrative law judges, contracts appeals board members, and administrative appeals judges. So that's your universe of further restricted employees, the 2 screens that you've just seen. Before we get into the restrictions, a couple of other things to cover regarding coverage. First, we get often many questions about part-time employees, and are they covered by the Hatch Act, or are they covered differently? And the answer is that they are covered by the Hatch Act, and no differently than if you're a full-time employee. In addition, if you're on leave, whether it's annual leave, sick leave, unpaid status leave, you are still covered by the Hatch Act. So that means that many of the restrictions that we're going to be discussing that we call 24/7 prohibitions will be in play even when you're on annual leave. So, for example, we get a lot of questions as we get closer to the campaign season where employees want to take 2 weeks off of annual leave to go volunteer for a campaign. And if you're less restricted, you can do that. But what that individual needs to bear in mind is that the 24/7 prohibitions, they still have to observe. They're going to still be subject to those 24/7 prohibitions. For example, like the one on soliciting for political contributions. So we'll discuss that further as we move through the presentation, but wanted to address that now. The other question that came up regarding coverage had to do with employees during the furlough. So even when we were all furloughed, or most of us, we were still subject to the Hatch Act, and in particular the 24/7 prohibitions. So as we move into the discussion of what the Hatch Act prohibits and permits, a term that both Erica and I are going to be using frequently is political activity. And the definition of political activity is found in the Hatch Act regulations, and it means any activity directed toward the success or failure of a partisan candidate, political party, or partisan political group. So any question, any issue that arises, any complaint concerning a federal employee, we are always looking to see if the activity falls within this definition. Because at the end of the day, the Hatch Act only interdicts partisan activity. And so we're looking to see if there's involvement with a political party, candidate for partisan office, or partisan political group. So what is political activity in terms of, the real world application? How do we see this definition in play? So as we get closer to the campaign season, and these are some current examples, we see employees that want to display in some capacity these types of messages in their office, right? Whether it's a screensaver or a poster or a bumper sticker that they want to display in their office. And messages such as the ones that are on display right now, Stop Hillary, or here's the Republican field, and talking about the extreme agenda of the Republican field with the candidates, this is political activity. So if this type of display is occurring on duty or in the federal workplace, this would be prohibited. But we get a number of questions concerning emails or issues concerning President Obama. So basically either pro or anti-President Obama emails, where employees are expressing their views about the president, policies, etc. The president is no longer a candidate. So any emails that employees while on duty circulate, right, that are either for or against President Obama do not fall under the definition of political activity because he's no longer a candidate. Same thing, occasionally I've had through the Hatch Act inbox, people will complain about someone having something in their office that says Miss W. Same situation, same application as the one with President Obama. George W. Bush is no longer a candidate, so any displays in the federal workplace for or against the former president do not fall under the definition of political activity. A couple more examples of what is not political activity. So we see in the workplace many emails that employees are circulating about legislation. And some of the examples that we see, for example, concern Affordable Care Act, or as some people call it, Obamacare, DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, and many others. And going back to that definition of political activity, messages about legislation that do not tie back to a candidate, to a partisan political group or political party, those types of messages are not viewed as political activity. They do not fall under the definition of political activity. But if you take that same message where you're showing your support for or against the Affordable Care Act, and you now add to that message, to repeal the Affordable Care Act, we should elect X, and you fill in the blank, right, with any of the presidential candidates. That's now political activity, because now the message is tied to the success or failure of a candidate for partisan office. Same thing with ballot initiatives. Again, that is typically a nonpartisan issue. And so emails about ballot initiatives in the workplace or on duty, not political activity. Same thing with budget issues or other issues like gun control, pro-choice, pro-life. These are some issues that people feel very passionate about, but unless they tie them to a candidate or a political party or partisan political group, it will not constitute political activity. Now, having said that, we always try to caution employees that although something is not a violation of the Hatch Act, they should still contact their ethics office to make sure that there are not rules in place concerning the use of a government computer for personal matters. And obviously these types of emails would fall under that category.
And Anna, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. We have a question from the audience. The question is there a one-stop resource for information about which political parties had a candidate for president who made it on the ballot in at least one state? And that's going to tie back to the issue of what is a partisan election and wanting to know which parties ran candidates in the last presidential election. And the answer to that question is there is actually. The Federal Election Commission puts out a publication every 4 years that basically lists, it's a lengthy booklet, but it lists all the candidates on all the parties for every single state. And we actually use that as a resource in the Hatch Act unit in case we do get any questions about elections where there's a party that maybe we're not sure whether it had a candidate in the last presidential election.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's really good practical information.
Thanks. A little bit more in this area of what is not political activity. We get many questions. In fact, yesterday I got a question about the Tea Party. And I also get many questions about MoveOn.org. And some of you that have seen our presentation before probably know what I'm going to say next. But it bears repeating because this is an issue that continues to come up. The Tea Party, for the most part, and then I'll give you the exception, is sort of an umbrella term for a movement. And many of the Tea Party groups are organized as 501c4s. They're organized to promote social welfare issues. They may participate in some political activity as long as it's not their primary activity. And those groups do not fall in any of the categories that would trigger the definition of political activity. They are not a political party, with the exception of one in Florida, which I'll mention in a moment, and they're not considered a partisan political group. So if you have an employee that wants to send out an email to his or her colleagues inviting them to an event, let's say out on the mall, to show their support on an issue, let's say taxes, right? That event in and of itself that's being hosted by a 501c4 Tea Party group is not going to constitute political activity in terms of the employee sending that email out while they're at work or on duty, okay? But the difficulty sometimes with the Tea Party is that, for example, in Florida, there is a state party that is the Tea Party. My understanding is it's the Florida Tea Party Express. And so when we get questions about the Tea Party, one of the things that we're looking at is, are we dealing with an issue in Florida? Because then we have to, sort of check that box or not as to whether we're dealing with a social welfare organization or are we dealing with the political party. In addition, many of the Tea Party groups have PACs. And PACs, whether it's a PAC, a super PAC, doesn't matter, they are partisan political organizations. So if what the employee wants to circulate at work is an invitation to an event that's being hosted by a Tea Party PAC, that will constitute political activity because it's activity related to a partisan political group. Same thing with MoveOn.org. MoveOn.org has both a civic side and a PAC side. And so the same analysis that I've just described for the Tea Party applies to MoveOn.org. If the PAC side of MoveOn.org is hosting the event, then an employee at work should not be circulating emails about MoveOn.org and the event, okay? But if it's the civic side, then likely the activity would not fall under political activity. Recently, we've had some questions also come up. In fact, I've had 2 agencies now call me about CGI America, which is the Clinton Global Initiative America, and we've advised that that group is a 501c3. It's a charitable organization. So it may be that some federal officials are being invited to participate in an event that CGI America is hosting in Denver in June, and the participation of a federal employee with that group is not viewed as political activity. And I know that I've heard from the ethics community their concern being that the group has is highly or closely affiliated with one of the presidential candidates, but that's not enough to turn a charitable organization into a political organization. So in terms of Hatch Act issues, in terms of a federal employee participating, we don't see that as participation in a political event if it's CGI America that's involved. Do you have anything to add here, Erica?
I do not.
Okay. So moving into the 5 prohibitions, the first 4 that Erica and I will be discussing, we call, and we now emphasize, we didn't used to do this years ago, but we now emphasize them as the 24/7 prohibitions. These are the prohibitions that even if it's Saturday morning and you're at home and you're not on duty, you are still subject to these prohibitions. So you have to be careful when you're away from the workplace in terms of not engaging in any of these activities. And to quickly identify them, they are that as federal employees, we may not use our official authority or influence to affect the outcome of an election. We may not solicit, accept, or receive a political contribution. We may not be candidates in partisan elections, and we may not solicit or discourage the political activity of a person with business before our employing office. The next restriction is not a 24/7 restriction. It's more of a time, place, manner prohibition. I've already been discussing it a little bit within the examples. And that is that as federal employees, we may not engage in political activity while on duty, in the federal workplace, or while wearing a government uniform or official insignia, or while operating a government vehicle. And so the first prohibition that I'm going to spend some time discussing, and then I'm going to turn the presentation over for a while to Erica, is the use of official authority prohibition. Again, it's a 24/7 prohibition. And we, unfortunately, every year continue to see a number of violations involving the use of official authority. And these tend to be very serious violations. These are the ones in terms of our limited resources and picking and choosing where we want to focus our enforcement actions. These are the cases that we're passionate about enforcing the Hatch Act, but these are the cases that we are really passionate about because this prohibition is really the reason why we have a Hatch Act. And that is demonstrated through some of the examples that I'm going to be going over. But basically, as federal employees, we exercise official authority in many different ways. And we have to be mindful that that official authority can never be employed to help a candidate or a political party. And so the first area that I want to discuss is official authority cases involving subordinates. And unfortunately, despite a number of cases that we discuss every year and the outreach efforts, we continue to see cases where supervisors direct political activity at their subordinates. And let me begin by saying that it is never okay to involve a subordinate in a supervisor's political activity. And as many of you probably have heard me say over the years, no magic words are necessary to make a request by a supervisor to a subordinate that they engage in political activity to be coercive. Basically, the case law in this area demonstrates that the relationship between a supervisor and a subordinate is such that it's inherently coercive. So that's why we always say no magic words are necessary. It doesn't matter if you send an email as a supervisor to a subordinate and saying, hey, this is an FYI email about a candidate, if you haven't made your mind up. And we've seen cases like that where people say, I was just providing information to the staff. That is still inherently coercive and prohibited under this restriction. And let me give you a couple of examples. These are some of the more current examples. We recently had, and I think this case is really the poster child for why we have a Hatch Act. We recently had a career SES, and I said recently, but this goes back to the 2012 election, where the individual was a career SES, and according to him, he was setting up a PAC in support of then candidate Obama's reelection effort. Okay, so when the president was seeking reelection, and he was claiming to set up this PAC and was seeking contributions from at least one subordinate that we're aware of in the vicinity of about approximately $2,000. I think the amount was like $2,400 or $2,500. And he approached this GS-15 subordinate on a number of occasions, asking that she donate to this PAC that he was establishing, and in fact indicated that if she made the contribution, he would assist her in her effort to get into the career SES ranks. So basically, he had devised what I call a pay-to-play scheme, and totally corrupt sort of the merit advancement that the civil service is founded on. Well, this employee did not do anything. She did not make a contribution. She stayed quiet and sort of endured these requests by the supervisor. Then came performance appraisal time, and as I understand it, she received a glowing performance appraisal, and the individual, the subject in this case, then approached her. Let me back up. So he, to go along with the performance appraisal, she received a bonus, I believe, in the vicinity of $2,500. And he then suggested in a follow-up conversation that given her bonus, she should now use it to make a contribution to his PAC. Very, very serious conduct. We filed a complaint. Have I left any facts out?
No. I don't think so.
In fact, I did. He, in another instance, came to her and showed her a check from another employee saying, see, she's made out a check, now something to the effect, now it's your turn. So again, very, very serious. I couldn't make up these facts if I tried. We filed a disciplinary action complaint. We took this case very seriously. This individual unfortunately retired from federal service after we filed the complaint. So what we have then is a case where we've had to move to dismiss the case without prejudice, and the board has given us the opportunity, if this gentleman were to come back to federal service, we have 5 years to refile that complaint. But again, a very, very serious case. Another case that we have, not as serious, but still involving, and a more commonplace case, involves a supervisor who sent, during the 2014 election, sent an email to staff telling them or suggesting who they should vote as an alternative in a congressional race. And as if that wasn't enough, he followed up with at least one subordinate to make sure that the subordinate had read the email. And so that's a case that we're currently trying to hammer out some disciplinary action. Again, serious case. So those are examples of cases involving supervisors and subordinates. We also see unique cases where it doesn't involve the supervisor or subordinate, but the relationship is no different. And let me give you an example involving a doctor and a patient at a federal facility. We are currently investigating a case involving a doctor, a psychiatrist, who was running for in violation of the Hatch Act for a congressional race. And so not only was he engaged in prohibited candidacy, but as we are learning from our investigation, he took his official agency business cards and on the back of them printed, "Vote for so-and-so in the congressional race." As if that wasn't enough, we've learned through the investigation that, oh, and by the way, and he was handing these business cards out to his psychiatric patients. In addition to that, we've learned that in at least one of his campaign ads, he had one or two of his patients appear in support of his candidacy. So that's a case that we're currently working, very serious case. If we're able to put all the facts together, I could see this as a case where we would be pursuing disciplinary action. Moving to another type of activity that would be prohibited under the use of official authority is using, in a general sense, one's position to support a candidate. And I don't know if you all recently saw, about 6 months ago, maybe longer now, it was last summer, we filed a complaint, or maybe it was in the spring of 2014, but we filed a complaint involving an employee that was at a call center and took questions from the public. So he was there like a hotline center.
And he was an IRS employee.
Yes, thank you. He was an IRS employee. And this individual, as we learned, and the IRS records these communications, so that's why we were able to establish this, we received complaints that this individual was, when engaged with the public, and the public was asking this individual to identify who he was and to spell his name, he came up with what he thought was a witty way to communicate to the public who he was supporting in the election. And he did that by using his name, something to the effect of like, E is for elect, and O is for Obama, and N is in November. And there's a couple more letters in between, but the message was basically elect Obama in November, as he was engaging with taxpayers. So we filed, after investigating the case, we filed a complaint with the Merit Systems Protection Board, and that case resulted in a 100-day suspension for this individual. So again, a very serious outcome for what we felt was a very serious use of official authority.
And I think that's really important as ethics officials when we're training employees. The consequences for violating the Hatch Act can be very significant.
Absolutely.
These aren't sort of small matters. These are very important matters that we take very seriously.
Absolutely. And in fact, as many of you know, there's been some changes to the penalty provisions. And some of these cases that we're discussing, like the one I just mentioned, was subsequent to the changes in the penalty. So we're taking these cases very seriously despite the broadening of the penalty range available. Let me see, because I'm known to run out of time, and I see that time is ticking, but there's a couple more things to cover before I turn it over to Erica for solicitation. So again, we're seeing cases from the 2012 election where people that were instructors, so they have a batch of new federal employees, and they are attending a training class. So basically they are a hostage to this instructor. And we've had cases where the instructors are allegedly telling people who to vote for or who not to vote for. Some of these cases have proved difficult for us in terms of our burden of proof and gathering the evidence. Some people don't recall. We've got conflicting testimony. But the bottom line, our view is that more likely than not, some of these allegations are true. We've just had difficulty in terms of putting those cases together. So something to keep in mind with folks that you might have in your agencies that are dealing with trainees or they're mentoring, same type of concerns, right? Because again, it's a use of official authority that's being directed at someone that has to engage with you. Official title. When you're engaged in political activity, you may not use your official title. It has to be in your personal capacity. So that's another important area when we have people that go out on the campaign trail. Maybe they speak on behalf of a candidate at a campaign event. They need to understand that the invitation cannot have their official title. If they can use the title the Honorable, that's permissible. But in terms of their official title at the agency, that is not permissible. When they're speaking, they can't use the weight of their office to endorse their candidate. Again, they're in their official, they're there in their personal capacity. And in fact, the White House, in the last election cycle, issued a memo, and they made it very clear, and this was directed at their politicals, but this applies to any federal official that would be speaking, that it should be clear from the introduction, if you're speaking at an event, and your remarks, that you are not speaking as a government official. Thus, what you say should be different than what you would say at an official event. Do not reuse an official speech. And I think for a long time, there was a belief that you could sort of recycle official speeches. White House memo makes it very clear, do not reuse an official speech, because you're there in your personal capacity. If you discuss an issue related to your job, you should discuss issues outside your official responsibility too. You should also keep policy discussions general and avoid detailed discussions of particular pending government decisions. Do not share non-public or deliberative information. Remarks about a candidate's leadership, the political landscape, a candidate's potential adversaries, and your personal views of why this election is important are all appropriate, okay? The other thing that is worth noting is that if an individual, you meet someone at a political event, for example, a donor, and they want to discuss official matters, the employee should inform that individual that they're there in their personal capacity. So, you know, they can invite the person to contact them at the office, right? But in terms of discussing official matters when you're there in your personal capacity at a political event, that should not be occurring. And I'm trying to move through these points as quickly as possible. So the next point, using agency resources, including official websites, social media accounts. The key here is that agency websites, agency official, Facebook pages, official Twitter pages must remain official. There cannot be content on these sites that link the site to a political party or a candidate. For example, we had an agency that retweeted on their official Twitter page, they retweeted a message from a DC mayoral candidate. Can't use official resources to promote that kind of message. We've also had many questions about personal Twitter accounts being converted to official Twitter accounts. So someone from the private sector, let's say, moves into a government position and they want to keep all their followers and convert their personal Twitter page into their official. Because as a federal official now, they're being required to have an official Twitter page. You have to be careful with those kind of scenarios, because as we quickly learned, we've had 1 or 2 cases where when the person converted the personal to official, they inadvertently brought all their political activity onto an official page, okay? So if that's the case, that's not permissible. The official Twitter page must remain nonpartisan, must remain neutral. Same thing with an official Twitter page following candidates in partisan races. That would be prohibited. Or linking Facebook page to the DNC, to the RNC. We've seen, these are examples of things we've seen. So be careful if you're advising on these matters. Some of these are inadvertent violations, but people need to be aware that these agency resources should not be used for partisan purposes.
And I think that's conceptually very similar to things that we deal with all the time as ethics officials under Subpart G of our standards of conduct, because we are, in fact, one of the primary things we emphasize with employees is the use of official things, materials, accounts, authority for official purposes only, and not for the private benefit of others outside of the government.
Correct. And I think we're ready to talk about, you think, the use of official title with the website, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So the last point I want to make here is we get a lot of questions about folks that have, for example, a profile on their social media page, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or any other social media platform a federal employee may be using. And the profile page will ask for, a lot of information, biographical information about you. And so you see an example up on the screen right now. Your name, where you work, maybe your position at your agency, your political views or your political affiliation. And the question that comes up in this area of use of official authority is, may I fill in all of those fields? May I identify where I work, my position, and also identify myself as a Democrat, as a Republican, as a Green Party candidate member, etc.? And the answer that we've given the federal community is that you may. There needs to be a greater nexus than just merely filling out a profile between the use of your official title and the political activity at issue. So what would not be permissible would be that you now go to the part of your Facebook page where you can post your views and your opinions, and now use your official position to leverage your political views, by saying, as director so-and-so of the EPA, I believe that this candidate would be best on environmental issues. That's the violation, the use of official title while engaged in political activity, but not merely filling out your profile and then at a later point on your Facebook page typing away, your political views.
That's actually conceptually very similar to guidance that OGE has recently issued on the use of official title with respect to social media. So if you're interested in the ethical implications of this very issue, I'd encourage you to look at that recent opinion.
We've done enough here. Okay, so now there's a lot more that I could say on use of official authority. And again, that's why I think, we're hoping to have more engagements like this with the ethics community so we can cover some more unique issues, but I'm going to turn it over to Erica to discuss solicitation.
Okay, so again, this is going to be one of the 24/7 prohibitions. Federal employees cannot solicit, accept, or receive political contributions. And nowadays campaigns are fundraising in so many different ways, and particularly via email and via social media. And that's where we are tending to see more federal employees get tripped up with respect to this prohibition. So a couple of different types of activities I want to talk about that we've seen in our office or we've litigated, and kind of what the results have been. One, I think, it's still current, but it's not as modern as some of the new stuff we're seeing. But forwarding solicitations that federal employees receive from campaigns. So campaign sends an email to a federal employee. The email solicits contributions for the campaign. Federal employee forwards that on, to one person, 10 people, 20 people, what have you. That's going to be a violation of the Hatch Act. And we litigated a case just like that several years ago. It's the Special Counsel v. Mark case, where the federal employee did that. And not only did he forward the email, but he sent it while he was at work, and he sent it to federal employees as well, which the board found to be, aggravating factors with respect to that activity. And for sending that one solicitation email, the board ordered him suspended without pay for 120 days. So it's really important to emphasize with employees that the solicitation prohibition, it's a serious one, and again, it applies all the time. Other things that we've seen, employees forwarding emails on from campaigns where maybe the text of the email itself doesn't ask for money, but there's a big, giant, blinking donate box at the bottom of the email that when you click on it, takes you directly to the campaign's solicitation page where you can make a donation to the campaign. Forwarding emails with those donate buttons, we've concluded, is also soliciting in violation of this prohibition. And we've also seen employees forwarding on invitations to fundraising events. The invitation is sent via email. The employee gets it, forwards it on to friends, family, what have you, that also is going to be viewed as a violation of this prohibition, because the employee is now inviting other individuals to a fundraising event. And someone actually asked me recently at another outreach presentation about a fundraiser and whether a fundraiser is considered a fundraiser if you don't have to pay to attend the event. And we've always advised that if the purpose of the event is to raise money for the candidate, it is a fundraiser for purposes of the Hatch Act, regardless of whether you have to pay to go. We had a case many, many years ago where a federal employee hosted a fundraiser in his home, invited friends over, they watched the presidential debate, and then he had a laptop set up in the back of his room, open up to his candidate of choice's campaign website, where attendees could then make a contribution online to the candidate. And we concluded that that was a violation of this prohibition, because that individual had hosted a fundraiser, which is prohibited by this particular prohibition. So a couple other things, moving away from email and more into social media. We've seen several cases now with federal employees who are either sharing a solicitation from a campaign, or liking a solicitation, tweeting a solicitation, or retweeting a solicitation. And what happens, with those of you who are familiar with social media, the whole point of social media is to connect with your friends or your network and get the message out. And so when federal employees are sharing or liking, tweeting, retweeting, the solicitation is being sent to all of their friends, all of their social network. And so that is a violation of this prohibition. And again, we've seen several cases now with employees who have done just that. We had one case in particular with a federal employee, a further restricted employee as well, who was engaging in a lot of political activity at work via Twitter. And one of the things that she was doing, in addition to just tweeting about candidates in general, she was also retweeting solicitations from campaigns, and that's going to be a violation of this prohibition. That particular employee, her activity was very egregious, again, and she was engaging in a lot of activity at work, soliciting, and she was also further restricted, so she wasn't even allowed to be retweeting campaign messages, period. She, in the midst of our investigation, agreed to settle the case by resigning from her employment and agreeing not to be reemployed by the federal government for 2 years. Again, that a very egregious case in terms of the extent of her activity.
But just to clarify,
Sure.
These prohibitions do follow you home. These are the 24/7
Absolutely.
prohibitions. So even if you wait until you get home and you're retweeting those solicitations, that is still prohibited.
Yes, and thank you for emphasizing that. Definitely. It doesn't matter whether you're home or at work, on duty or not, you cannot solicit. So we've also seen, kind of the more traditional ways that you can solicit in violation of the Hatch Act. I already mentioned hosting a fundraiser is prohibited by this prohibition. Inviting others to a fundraiser, being a sponsor or a point of contact for a fundraiser, selling tickets to a fundraiser, all of that is going to be prohibited by this prohibition. And one case I want to talk about where we had an employee who actually had a little bit of both, had some traditional soliciting and some modern soliciting. And what he was doing, the way the complaint came to us, was he was sending out emails at work, but via his personal email account, and someone had received them and sent a complaint to our office. And we investigated. We actually asked the employee to do a search of his Gmail account, because all of his activity was via his personal account. And he did that. Most employees do tend to cooperate with our investigations. And he turned over all of his emails that met the search criteria. So this particular employee, he was engaging in a lot of political activity at work, but he was also forwarding fundraising invitations to others, both at work and while he was home as well. And then we also found out during his interview that he hosted a fundraiser in addition to forwarding these other fundraising invitations. So he kind of had a whole different collection of Hatch Act violations going on. He currently is serving his suspension. He agreed to admit to the activity. We didn't have to file a complaint with the board, and he is currently serving a 112-day suspension without pay.
Wow.
For that activity. And I see there's a question that came in, so I'm going to take a pause to read that. The question is liking a candidate on Facebook or liking a friend's post about a candidate distinguishable from liking a fundraising post? Well, it depends on the friend's post. Certainly, if the post is asking for money, if it's soliciting for a candidate, even if it's not coming directly from the candidate. Say a Facebook friend of yours does their own post saying everyone should give money to this candidate. Liking that post, that's going to distribute that on to all of your friends. And because the post solicits, you have now solicited as well. So that's going to be problematic. But simply liking a candidate on Facebook without liking a particular post that solicits, that's not going to be problematic under the Hatch Act.
Correct. That's good. So those are some sort of fine distinctions that we want to be very aware of, and when we train our employees, make sure especially that they are aware of these distinctions.
Absolutely. And we have a very comprehensive advisory opinion dealing with social media and some of the kind of nuances that arise when advising on this topic that I believe is part of this presentation.
Yeah, we'll be sharing that with everyone who is listening in when you receive your course evaluation. So you'll look for that attached to the email.
Great. And I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit. But, speaking of Facebook, a question that does come up a lot when we do these presentations is employees are concerned about what if another individual posts a solicitation on my Facebook page? Have I now violated the Hatch Act, or do I need to do something about that post? And we've advised you definitely have not violated the Hatch Act just because someone else has posted a solicitation on your page. It's clear by looking at the post that the post is coming from someone else and it's not coming from you. And we've also advised that you don't have any kind of affirmative duty to delete that post. As long as you don't do anything with it in terms of liking it or sharing it or commenting on it, you just leave it be. That's going to be fine and you're not going to have violated the Hatch Act.
Excellent. And it looks like we have another question that's just come in. And the question is, does the Facebook and Twitter restriction apply even if you don't identify your workplace on your profile? So does it matter if my Twitter account says that I work for the federal government?
Well, not when you're talking about the solicitation prohibition. Again, this is a 24/7 prohibition, and it has nothing to do with whether you're soliciting in your personal capacity or your official capacity. So even assuming your Facebook account has no reference at all to where you work, everything that I've talked about is still applicable. You cannot solicit via Facebook. You cannot like solicitations on Facebook.
And I think that's really important, especially for the ethics community, because our rules tend to focus on the use of the authority of your position inappropriately. But these rules are more about what you can do as a person, as a human being.
Exactly.
And not just what you can do with your title.
Exactly. So quickly, I just want to mention, because this question always comes up during outreach, is, in terms of hosting a fundraiser, a lot of people want to know, well, what if I live with somebody who's not a federal employee? Can they host a fundraiser in our home? And the answer is yes. So whether it's a spouse or a roommate who you live with, who you share a home with, if that individual is not a federal employee, that individual is not prohibited from hosting a fundraiser in your home. You as a federal employee, though, or the employees that you're advising, just need to be careful to make sure that there is not given the impression that the employee is hosting as well. So, from the wording of the invitation, making it clear that it's, the spouse that's hosting it and not the employee. Even the employee, if the employee chooses to attend the fundraiser, the employee's activity at the fundraiser needs to be like all other attendees, not greeting people at the door, taking coats, introducing guest speakers, because those are the type of activities that would suggest that the employee is also hosting. So we just, we tell employees to be careful if their spouse or roommates are hosting a fundraiser in their home, that they need to kind of attend it, as a passive attendee like all others. And certainly if employees have questions about that, we're always here to answer those. A couple other things with fundraising. Federal employees can be a speaker at a fundraiser, which may sound counterintuitive because a fundraiser, the purpose is to raise money for the candidate. But as long as the employee is not encouraging people to give money to the campaign or to the candidate during his or her speech, it's perfectly fine for a less restricted employee to speak at a fundraiser and talk about how great the candidate is. We just also caution, though, that the invitation to the fundraiser, if it's going to list the employee as a guest speaker, which is okay under the Hatch Act, that the invitation in no way suggests that the employee is soliciting money for the campaign. One thing about those fundraising events, though, that has come up recently is there are fundraising events that we kind of call these tiered events, where there's a certain cost to attend the event, but then the invitation will indicate basically that you can have a special access maybe to the guest speaker for an additional amount of money, or maybe a photo opportunity with the guest speaker for an additional amount of money. And we've advised that federal employees should not be basically the special attraction to raise more money for the fundraiser. So a federal employee, it would be okay for them to be a guest speaker, but they would not be able to participate in one of these kind of special access or photo op where attendees pay more money to get access to that employee. We view that as that employee basically, giving the appearance that the employee is soliciting that extra money for that special access. So we've advised employees against that. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that there is an exception, one small exception to the fundraising prohibition, and that deals with federal employee labor unions that have political action committees. If an employee is a member of an employee labor union, and that union has a PAC, that employee can solicit other union members, as long as they're not a subordinate, for a contribution to the PAC, as long as they don't do it while at work. So it has to be, two members of the union. The contribution has to be for the union PAC, and there cannot be a supervisor-subordinate relationship between the two. And I also really want to emphasize that it doesn't occur in the federal building, because aside from the Hatch Act prohibitions, there's criminal implications as well in terms of soliciting in the workplace.
And Erica,
yes.
When you say the federal building, does that include the union office?
If the union office is located in a federal room or building, then yes, the union office would be off limits as well. So I'm going to just move on. We have a couple of examples, and these examples illustrate basically, why we advise that liking or sharing solicitation posts on Facebook or retweeting them on Twitter is problematic. So you'll see here, there's a post from Marco Rubio. The post asks for money. When you like or share that post, it then shows up in your friends, your Facebook friends, either the news feed or kind of the news ticker along the right-hand side. So by liking or sharing, you are further distributing that solicitation in violation of the Hatch Act. Similarly with Twitter, retweeting, here's a Hillary Clinton asking for money for her campaign, retweeting that tweet, again, gets shared then to all the individuals who are following you on Twitter. So again, by further distributing that solicitation, you're violating the Hatch Act. Okay, I'm going to move on to candidacy quickly. Candidacy, federal employees cannot be candidates for public office in partisan elections. This is a pretty straightforward prohibition, but we are seeing a rise in the number of complaints in our office dealing with federal employees running for office. So I think it's really important as ethics officials that you continue to emphasize to employees that this is prohibited, and that candidacy can begin sooner than when you file your nominating petitions, so that federal employees have to leave federal service before they engage in, for example, any of the activities you see on the screen right now. It's not just when they file their petitions that they then have to cease federal service. And a couple of unique elections that are worth mentioning today, just because they've come up recently in our office. Elections that aren't your typical, Republican-Democratic primary and then, general election in November. Louisiana has something called an open primary system, where there are not party primaries. There's just a primary where anybody could run, and then maybe top 2 vote getters go on to the general election. But even though it's this non-party open primary, if a candidate is registered with party affiliation, that party affiliation appears on that open primary ballot. So we've advised that because of that open primary is a partisan election for purposes of the Hatch Act. And there's been some confusion with the advice that employees have received, from the state of Louisiana, or maybe even from their own agency, about the nature of that election. And then just another unique election in Washington State. They have a system where instead of listing a candidate as Republican or Democrat, they have what's called party preference. So you could have your party preference is Republican or your party preference is Democrat. And that's even for congressional elections. And again, we've advised that even though it's unique, you're still identifying, the party that you're affiliated with, and that's a partisan election for purposes of the Hatch Act. But as many of you probably know, employees can be candidates in nonpartisan elections, and less restricted employees can run for party office. Precinct committee person, delegate to a convention, running for party chair, all of that is okay under the Hatch Act for less restricted employees. And then there's the designated locality exception, which I'm not going to get into right now, except to mention for those of you who are in the DC area, the Hatch Act Modernization Act of 2012 basically allowed DC to become a designated locality, which it wasn't for many, many years. So for those of you in the DC area who that was a concern for in the past, DC is now a designated locality.
And we have another question that's come in, and a viewer asks, does formation of an exploratory committee constitute the start of a candidacy?
Yes, my answer to that would be yes. If you're getting an exploratory committee together, maybe doing name recognition polls, kind of going and trying to get a feel for whether a candidacy would be a viable option, that still, for purposes of the Hatch Act, would constitute candidacy. So a federal employee would need to terminate their federal service before engaging in that type of activity.
Excellent. And it looks like we have another question coming in. Further restricted employee has a political aspirations but does not want to leave federal employment until he knows that he has a shot at being elected. If a PAC was set up for him and he has no involvement in the PAC, would that violate the Hatch Act?
Yes. If the employee is aware of an effort to basically raise money for his possible future campaign, that is going to be problematic under the Hatch Act. The employee would need to, disavow that effort if he's aware of that kind of effort going on.
Excellent. I'm sort of sensing a theme that there aren't a lot of sort of technical that we're looking for. Really, we're looking at the substance of the matter. Are you indeed exploring or moving in the direction of seeking political office?
Exactly. And just one other thing worth mentioning here, as we're talking about candidacy, the most recent MSPB decision on the Hatch Act is a candidacy case. If you're interested, it's OSC v. Lewis, and it's 121 MSPR 109. And the reason that this case is interesting, at least from our perspective, is that it's the first case under the new penalty structure. That was as a result of the Modernization Act in 2012. And so there's a good discussion in this case about the new penalty structure and the fact that the board is going to be applying the Douglas factors when determining the appropriate penalty for a federal employee who violates the Hatch Act. So worth reading if you're interested in that.
Yes, and if you'd like to know more about MSPB cases, our last presentation last week was on MSPB cases and ethics rules. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out as well.
So moving on, this next prohibition, I'm just going to mention that it's there. Employees may not knowingly solicit or discourage the political activity of anyone who has business pending before their employing office. Again, this is a violation it's a knowing one, so you have to know that the individual you're soliciting or discouraging the political activity of actually has business pending before your office. That's really all I'm going to say because we just don't get any complaints alleging a violation. I think in the many years I've been there, we've had one.
Which is hopefully a good thing.
Yes, I think people intuitively know this is not a good thing to do. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Anna.
Okay, and I'm going to try to move quickly through the last prohibition, which is the political activity on duty prohibition. Just as a refresher from the opening slides, all federal employees, with a minor exception that I will address in a few minutes, but mostly all federal employees, while they're on duty or in a government room or building, wearing an official uniform or insignia or using a government vehicle, are prohibited from engaging in political activity. And again, that's activity directed at the success or failure of a partisan candidate, political party, or partisan political group. A couple of things to keep in mind here. Government room or building includes break rooms, conference rooms, union offices, gyms, if they're inside the federal facility, and cafeterias. Sometimes people think that they can go downstairs to the federal government cafeteria that's in their building and with their own personal smart device, engage in political activity, but they're still in the federal building, so they're still subject to this workplace prohibition. Same thing with the gym. As we get closer to the election, we see people wanting to wear campaign t-shirts to work out. And that's okay if you're working out at the Y or Gold's Gym, but if you're in a gym that's within the federal facility, then that's going to be prohibited to wear any of the campaign items while you're working out. Government vehicle, I think, goes without explanation. But something to say about vehicles is bumper stickers. I always forget to mention bumper stickers, and usually someone in the audience says something. But if it's your personal vehicle, you can have a bumper sticker on your vehicle, even though you may park your vehicle in a federally owned or subsidized lot. So that is permissible. In terms of uniform, not that many of us wear uniforms, but still, uniforms are not permissible in terms of engaging in political activity. But the issue that might create more of an inadvertent violation is official insignia. Some of us have T-shirts with our agency official logo on them. Some of us may have 20-year pins. And we've seen cases where people inadvertently wear these items on the weekend and then go out and campaign on behalf of a candidate. That would be a violation. So the thing to remember here is make sure you don't have anything, if you're going to be engaged in political activity, that has your agency official logo. More examples. So when you're at work, right, you're on duty or in the federal facility, can't wear buttons, can't wear T-shirts, can't wear hats that, again, show your support for or against a political party or candidate, can't use your screensaver to show your preference for a candidate or political party. And every year we get pictures of people's offices, their screensavers, and what they're displaying. And usually what we try to do is call that person and explain that we've seen a picture of their office and that they need to take it down and put away all the campaign stuff. Same thing with posters being displayed in the office or candidate photographs.
Anna, before you go into detail with candidate photographs, there's a question from the ethics officials out there. The question is, what about an employee outside the workplace but in range of the agency wireless? Is there a problem with the employee using a personal device to send political communications? It's a good question.
That's a good question. I must admit, one that I don't think we've ever considered. So I'm assuming that the individual's not within the federal facility or any of the public spaces that still belong to the federal facility outside, like a courtyard, let's say. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the prohibitions on duty are in the workplace. So if the employee is not on duty and is not in the workplace or in an area that would be covered by the prohibition, I would say as long as they're not violating their agency's, use policy, that it would not be a Hatch Act violation.
That is correct.
I think there's a possibility for an ethics concern that we might have, depending on the de minimis policy of the agency and those kinds of things. But yeah, that's an interesting question.
Absolutely, and that's why we always, and I said this earlier, but we always, although we may clear someone on a Hatch Act issue, we always, when we think that there's potentially another issue in terms of agency policy, we always direct everyone to the ethics officials to have a further discussion.
And it looks like we have another question sort of clarifying the bumper sticker issue. So if you have a bumper sticker on the car that is parked in the basement garage of the federal building, is that kind of the example you were getting at?
That is correct, and that would be permissible. Okay. So, and what we try to say, and this stems from the Hatch Act regulations and the examples, the Hatch Act regs in this area actually provide a series of examples about the bumper stickers, which make it clear that it's permissible. But the Hatch Act regs are careful to say a bumper sticker. So it's not that we're holding people to one bumper sticker. We always get this question. Someone wants to have a bumper sticker on their car about a presidential candidate and maybe someone in a senatorial race. So yes, 2 bumper stickers is fine, even if you're driving that car to a federal lot. But what we advise against is converting or transforming your car into a campaign mobile, which we have also seen pictures of. So that's where we would say that would be a Hatch Act violation.
Excellent, thank you.
We've had recent questions about people wanting to have their iPad or iPhones in cases that have been designed by the campaigns or by the political parties. And so they want to know if they can have these cases in the workplace. And, you know, this is one of those where sometimes we scratch our heads in the office when we get these questions, but the bottom line is, if you're going to have that iPad and that iPhone out and on display, and many people do, then you cannot have those kind of cases in the workplace. If you're someone that's very disciplined and you're going to maintain that iPhone in your purse or your briefcase all day long, then it would be okay. But once you take that case out and it's on display in your office, you're in violation of the Hatch Act.
Thanks.
Okay. So going back to social media and the internet, really what drives a lot of the complaints that we receive with this workplace prohibition is the use of email and social media to communicate views about the candidates and the political parties. And so what we want to emphasize today is that if you're on duty or in the workplace, right, emailing, blogging, tweeting, posting to your social media accounts, etc., whatever else you might be doing, if it's for or against a candidate or a political party or partisan political group, it would be prohibited. Even if you're using a personal device or email account, even if you're sharing or forwarding content authored by others, even if you're sharing or forwarding to friends or like-minded coworkers. We get a lot of people saying, well, I was sharing it only with those friends of mine that think the same way. Doesn't matter. Even if it would be a violation, even if it's union email, if it meets the definition of political activity. And what I mean by that is that occasionally we'll see a union newsletter that also then talks about the union endorsing a candidate, or invites members of the union to a walk, talk, and talk event over the weekend, where they're going to be out there knocking on people's doors and promoting a candidate. Okay, that's political activity. So to have that kind of message in something that's being circulated at work would be prohibited. Okay. In this area, we receive questions about, can I read partisan content while I'm at work? Under the Hatch Act, we do not view reading as engaging in political activity, okay? So that if you're at lunch, you're not on duty, and you decide that instead of reading the Washington Post, you want to go see what a candidate is up to, and you want to read what's up on their page, or you want to go to a political party's page, under the Hatch Act, that would not be prohibited. However, I would always encourage someone to check with their agency to make sure that it's permitted under the agency's personal use policies when it comes to computers. So in terms of social media and email, there's really never going to be an appropriate time to engage in political activity if you're on duty or in the federal building. And by the way, many of us now telecommute. So even though you're not in the federal building at home, you're still on duty for a set amount of hours. So during the time that you're telecommuting from home or from a telework center, the same rules apply. You cannot be using even your personal devices to engage in political activity. There's a case, it's OSC v. Ware, and Ware is spelled W-A-R-E, that I want to bring to your attention. This is I believe it's a 2010 board case, and the reason I bring it up is that we sometimes, see emails where people will claim this was funny, this wasn't meant to be political activity, and I think this case, OSC v. Ware, captures how broad this restriction is, or how broad political activity has been interpreted. This case involved a series of emails by this federal employee. Some of the emails constituted solicitation, and one email she invited others to a fundraising event. So we charged it as solicitation, but we also charged some of the emails as just purely political activity on duty. And they included something that we called in the office the Obama Shuffle, and it was a YouTube video, as I recall it, and I think it had a number, like senior citizens,
yes,
wearing T-shirts that showed their support for then candidate Obama. This goes back to the 2008 election. And it was something about learning this shuffle dance to celebrate Obama's victory, assuming that he won the presidential election. And so it was meant to show people this dance so that we could all go out there and celebrate this victory. That was one of the emails. And this person circulated to a number of federal employees. And I think this case is also an interesting case because it also involved contractors that this person had some influence over. So it's also the board discusses the relationship between this COTAR and the contractors, and how that relationship is also subject to the use of official authority coercive analysis. And I know I digressed, but I'll go back to the political activity on duty. Another email involved a montage of photos of people at all these different campaign rallies where the Obamas were present. Both the First Lady, who at the time was not, but with the president and his wife, and sometimes the entire family at these events, maybe about 15 pictures. Mm-hmm. And we included these emails that this person was circulating, and we saw, by the way, this was not unique to this individual. We saw a lot of this in the 2008 election. And the board came back and concluded that sending these types of emails also constituted political activity. So even though the email, for example, the photograph one, did not say vote for, it was still meant to elicit a favorable view of the candidate and what was happening out on the campaign trail. And so these were found to be for, activity in support of a candidate. Same thing with the Obama Shuffle.
And in case anyone's interested, the case site for Special Counsel v. Ware is 115 MSPR 128.
Erica's already discussed some of the other cases, like the case involving the further restricted employee with the Twitter. A lot of the individual that resigned and agreed to a 2-year debarment. A lot of the activity was occurring on duty, so that was charged as an on-duty case as well. Do you have any other thoughts here in terms of any of the other political activity on duty? Okay, so let's go to some quick examples that capture some of what we're discussing. So we're starting to see folks wanting to display some of the campaign logos, and here are 2 current campaign logos that are out there. And in fact, Erica, this week, I think yesterday or 2 days ago.
Right, at an outreach presentation on Tuesday, someone asked an interesting question that we had not yet considered. Someone asked about Facebook and whether, on Facebook you have kind of your cover photo, which is the big photo up top of your Facebook page, but there's also the profile photo. That's that small picture that shows up every time you post something on Facebook. Well, somebody asked whether if they had, for example, one of these 2 campaign logos as their Facebook profile photo, would that then prohibit them from posting anything on Facebook while on duty or in the workplace, even if the post itself wasn't political? Maybe the post was about, cute bunnies or cute kittens or something like that. Because the idea is that every time they post something, regardless of what they post, this little campaign logo shows up next to their post and is distributed to all of their Facebook friends. And we actually had to take that one back to the office, but we did, and we talked about it, and we concluded that the employee was right, that the Hatch Act would prohibit the employee from posting while on duty or in the workplace anything if the employee's Facebook profile picture was a campaign logo or any partisan political material for that matter, any message that would be directed at the success or failure of a candidate or a political party. Because again, that partisan material is going to be posted and distributed to friends each time they post something on Facebook.
So again, displaying any of these items in any capacity in your office, including screensavers, iPad cases, coffee mugs, would be prohibited. And then the very unique situation that Erica described, and I'm sure we're going to see more of this as we progress, because the whole social media world just continues to evolve. So I suspect that we're going to continue seeing more of these issues. So this is something that comes up frequently in terms of whether it's political activity or not, and I'm sure, given this discussion that we've had today, that you all know the answer to this. But as you can see, these two items that people sometimes want to display at work, you know, whether it's the pro-life, pro-America mug or the I Love Planned Parenthood mug, neither of these are issues, and neither of these tie back to a candidate or a political party. So using these mugs at work would not be prohibited. Similarly, every campaign season, we have people that ask whether they can wear NRA buttons at work. Wearing an NRA button at work that doesn't not say anything else about candidates or political parties is not prohibited by the Hatch Act. The next examples that we've seen include questions about, you know, can I display these signs at work? And in fact, yesterday I had an ethics official call me about the Gadsden flag. And all these examples that are up there are permissible. They would not fall under the Hatch Act prohibition. The one dealing with Social Security is all about an issue and your views about millionaires and billionaires. Again, we've discussed the Tea Party, and so I know that this Gadsden flag, many Tea Partiers may have appropriated it, would not constitute political party because they're not a political party. And as discussed earlier, the pro-America, anti-Obama type messages, again, would not constitute political activity because President Obama is no longer a candidate. These next two examples illustrate what would be prohibited, and these are posts that are from the Democratic and Republican Party and show their support or opposition to candidates. Posting these while on duty or in the workplace would be prohibited, again, even if you're using your own personal devices. Similarly, by the way, and I don't know if Erica covered this, but we've had many employees that say, well, I received the email with these types of messages while I'm at work. And what they then do is forward it to their personal email account and then forward it while they're still at work. That is still prohibited. It's no different than using a personal device. They're still in the workplace while they're distributing or forwarding partisan messages. The last thing that I want to discuss in this area, that there is a small, narrow exception for this workplace prohibition, and the exception applies to certain high-level officials that are paid with an appropriation for the executive office of the president, and presidential appointees whose position is located in the United States and determine policies to be pursued in relations with foreign powers or the nationwide administration of federal laws. It's a narrow exception, and what this exception allows these few individuals is that they may engage in political activity while on duty in a government room or building, while wearing official uniform or insignia, or using a government vehicle. But the catch here is that the costs associated with their political activity is not to be paid by the U.S. Treasury. So, for example, if you are advising a PAS who falls under this exception and they want to host a political meeting in their office, they want to invite 2 or 3 political operatives or campaign operatives to their office for a lunch meeting. And the PAS wants to serve refreshments and maybe sandwiches. First thing is the cost of that meeting in terms of the food and the refreshments may not, the federal government cannot pay for the cost of the food and the refreshments. In addition, something very important, no one else that works for that PAS falls under this exception. So that no one that works for the PAS is in a position to help set up the meeting, be present at the meeting, or facilitate the meeting. Do you have anything to add here? Okay. So then I'm going to turn it over to Erica for one last, for a discussion on further restricted employees.
And I'll make this brief. You know, as Anna mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, further restricted employees can't take an active part in partisan political management or partisan political campaigning. So basically, you know, they still have, you know, their ability to vote and to support candidates, but they can't engage in any political activity that's in concert with a political party, a partisan political group, or a candidate for partisan political office. So some of the more traditional things that would be prohibited for further restricted employees, you know, going and volunteering for a campaign, going door to door and distributing campaign literature, you know, giving a speech at some kind of partisan political event in support of a campaign, or a candidate. You know, being a delegate to a party convention is going to be prohibited for further restricted employees, or holding any other kind of party office, or, you know, getting involved in party politics in terms of organizing party meetings, circulating nominating petitions. All of that type of traditional campaign activity is going to be prohibited for further restricted employees. But what I want to talk about that's more relevant to kind of the way campaigns are run today is social media and email. You know, we talked a lot about forwarding emails while you're on duty or in the workplace, but for further restricted employees, you know, any email that's coming from a campaign or coming from a political party or a candidate, federal employees cannot forward those emails at all, whether they're, further restricted employees cannot forward those emails at all, regardless of whether they're at home or at work, because that they're going to be further distributing that campaign literature, that partisan political material, and that's going to be prohibited because they're further restricted. And then in the social media realm, as I mentioned earlier, with social media, you know, the whole point is to connect with friends, connect with your social network. So at pretty much everything you do on social media, whether it's liking or posting or sharing or tweeting or retweeting, that all gets distributed to your friends and to your social network. So for a further restricted employee, any post from a campaign or a political party, a further restricted employee cannot like that post, cannot share that post. If it's a tweet, the further restricted employee cannot retweet that tweet, because that, again, they're further distributing the message from the partisan campaign or the political party, and that's going to be a violation of this prohibition. The one thing that we have advised further restricted employees, though, is you know, when we first put out this guidance and said that further restricted employees cannot like you know, Facebook pages or social media pages, a lot of further restricted employees came back to us and said, well, that's the way that we get information from those entities, is once you like, you know, a campaign Facebook page, then you get updates from the campaign via your Facebook page. And so what we've told further restricted employees is, you know, if your purpose is to gather information from, you know, whether it's a political party or a campaign, you can like or follow the page of a campaign or a party so that you may receive that information. But that's where it has to end. You can't now go onto the page and start liking or sharing individual posts within that page, because again, then you're distributing that material in violation of this, excuse me, this prohibition. So again, that social media guidance that we've issued, it goes into even more detail with respect to further restricted employees and social media, but those are kind of the highlights in this area. Anna, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think you've covered it.
And then lastly, I talked briefly about the board and the fact that they're now going to be applying the Douglas factors when determining the appropriate penalty. Many of you may be familiar, the Hatch Act Modernization Act of 2012 greatly broadened the range of penalties that the board may impose. So now it's anything from a letter of reprimand, a suspension, all the way up to removal, debarment. It's a much broader range, and, you know, we've been settling a lot of cases, you know, keeping these penalty provisions in mind. And then last slide is our contact information. For any of you who have not yet contacted us for Hatch Act help, we're here, and we really do strongly encourage you to reach out to us. I really strongly encourage you to reach out to us.
Excellent.
Anna, did you want to add anything?
What I'd like to do is thank everyone that signed up for this session. We hope to continue engaging with the ethics community during the next couple of months as we sort of march toward the presidential election. And as always, you can reach us by contacting us on our phone hotline or the Hatch Act inbox, where you can very quickly get advice from us and guidance that you may need to communicate to someone at your agency. But we really appreciate the time that you've given to this session.
Excellent, and I'd like to thank both Anna and Erica for joining us, and hopefully this is the first of a series of conversations with the ethics community as we move towards the presidential transition. It's going to be a big focus of us at OGE is preparing for that transition, and when it comes to the political issues, the starting line is much before our sort of financial disclosure timeline that we're focusing on. So we really appreciate you being here, and for those of you who stayed with us for the duration, we hope you found this to be useful, and this presentation, as all of our presentations, are available for further watching or watching again on the OGE Institute for Ethics in Government YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/OGE Institute. Until next time, I'm Patrick Shepard.